But today we have an interesting discussion on a subject that's really quite far afield from what we'd normally discuss. This show is called Let's Talk About God, but tonight we're going to be talking about atheism. And there's a reason for that, and that is what I've heard described as an existential cultural crisis that is causing atheists to reconsider their spiritual positioning on the subject of God. And I'm making tonight's video in the hope that some of you are going to have the opportunity to interact with people who are atheists or are on their journey toward Christianity. It'd be very easy to make the mistake of thinking that this is a binary choice. Someone's an atheist or they're a Christian. The truth is much closer to saying that it is a journey from non-belief to belief. And there are many steps along that journey. And my hope is that you'll be able to be a part of someone's journey toward finding a relationship with God. So let's start out by talking about what it is for someone to be an atheist. Well, being an atheist really can mean very different things. And I'm sure there are different ways of defining it. The definition that I found had 4 different layers to it, and so I'll share this one with you, even though there certainly are other definitions. At the top or the bottom, depending how you're measuring it, are what's called strong atheists. The strong atheist is someone who affirmatively states there is no God. And so it's not just true for them, it's true for everyone. And anyone who believes in a higher being is deluding themselves. That would be strong atheism. Then a less strong version is appropriately called weak atheism. And a weak atheist is someone who believes that, or I should say, who doesn't believe in God, but they don't take the stronger position of stating there is no God. They simply say, I don't believe there is a God. Now, there's another type of atheist, and this is known as agnostic atheism. An agnostic atheist is someone who says, well, I don't really believe in God, but I also don't think that you can ever know anyway. And so they're kind of straddling the fence between atheism and agnosticism. And finally, there's the agnostic position. And agnostic is one who says, we can't know. You can't ever know in this life whether there is a God or there isn't, so it's pointless to talk about it. So when we talk about atheism or lack of theism, then those are 4 ways that you might think of someone who is being an atheist or an agnostic. Now, who are atheists in our society? One thing that I'll tell you is the United States is significantly less atheistic than Western Europe. I think that the most atheistic country in Western Europe is France at 23%. So almost 1 out of every 4 people you'd meet in France is an atheist, whereas only 4% of people in America identify themselves as being atheists. So clearly we're not as far gone in that direction as Europe is, and various countries have other percentages. As I said, France is the most atheistic. But within America, who's most likely to be an atheist? And the answer is that you can demographically predict who most atheists are going to be. They tend to be younger people as opposed to older. And they also tend to be male as opposed to female. And again, these aren't huge differences where you could say, okay, every atheist is a young man. But they are clear majorities. So what else can I tell you about atheists as a group? They tend to be well educated, surprisingly, on the subject of religion. In fact, studies have shown that atheists tend to know more about what the Bible says about religion than Christians do. So usually they're people who have either been raised with the faith or they've taken the time to look into and get educated on the Christian faith, and then they have rejected it. They've said, okay, I understand what this is, and I don't believe it's true. So it's a disbelief in what they've learned about Christianity, as opposed to simply an ignorance of Christianity. So what sparked my interest in making this video and talking about atheists is a few weeks ago, I stumbled upon a video of someone who had been an atheist blogger and had recently made a shift from that and announced to his group that he was no longer an atheist. And I found it very interesting because I really never come across this before. And at the time, I thought, well, this is an interesting anecdotal story. But I was later to learn that there's really much more of a wave or a shift within a community that you guys need to know about. That this personal gentleman was saying how he had been an atheist for a long time and really took a great deal of satisfaction in going to atheist conferences and being an atheist podcaster. And it really was a big part of his life. And what precipitated his moving away from atheism was his life experience that atheism had become co-opted by wokeism. And he no longer enjoyed the atheistic community or the atheistic conferences because they had been overrun by people who had a very political ideology and a religious fervor to what they believed, but he didn't share their beliefs. He wanted to talk about all the reasons why there isn't a God, and they wanted to talk about feminism and equity and all these other things that really were quite separate from his purely spiritual viewpoint of there not being a God. And after seeing that video, I watched quite a few other videos over the last few weeks about atheists who have made a similar journey. Now, that particular individual has not yet become a Christian, but he has moved away from atheism because he observed changes both within society and changes inside him. And this is a very important point that I want to communicate to you. People who are growing dissatisfied with atheism are doing so on a societal level and a personal level of experience. He looked at what was going on in our society, say past 2020, and he really was turned off by it. It was not at all consistent with what he imagined would happen in a society that was governed by the laws of rationality and reason and freedom from religion. And this individual basically said, you know, we, the non-Christians, control the destiny of the society. Christianity is largely a dead or dying religion in America. And so I can't blame what's going on Christianity. And in fact, I have to conclude that the absence of Christianity from its traditional places in society has caused this breakdown in what society is in America. In other words, while he strongly disagreed with the beliefs or the tenets of Christianity, he has in hindsight come to recognize that America is a far better place to live when it is governed by the principles of Judeo-Christianity rather than, say, wokeism or Islam. And that's on a societal level. On an individual level, he said, I realize that my atheism has had profound effects on me as a person. I am more skeptical, more pessimistic. And I notice the absence of things in my life that I want, such as hope, such as, you know, looking forward to the future optimistically. He said, I don't have any source for that. What I've found personally is that atheism has left me empty on the inside. So I can intellectually argue for why atheism is the correct position, he would say. But in my heart, I'm left wanting. When I come across a societal crisis like the one we're in right now, I have no answers. I have no solutions. And I have no answers for myself either on an individual level. The only way I can see moving forward as a person is to move in the direction of some kind of faith, because I recognize that's what I'm lacking. That's what's missing in my life. Now, in looking at other videos, I did find that most of them seem to be from male uh, vloggers or male podcast hosters who have made this transition. And there's one that's very well known. I think that probably has something like 1 million subscribers, but he's someone I had heard of actually before because he is so large. And he recently came out and basically said, um, I'm through with this. And his reasons were much the same as this first person that I was telling you about. And as you can imagine, he's made a living from these atheistic views for a long time. He's been doing this for many years. And part of the reason that he did it, he'll be very honest about, is, well, it really paid well. He caught on to something that really was very popular. And there were lots of people who wanted to hear diatribes against Christianity and against belief. And there were a lot of things for him to comment about, and it made for a very good living. But what he has observed in his own life is much of the same as that other young man, is that um, he did not agree anymore with what he was preaching. In other words, he'd realized the emptiness of the atheist position, and he wants more. Now, he is not, I just finished watching a video by him, and he is not a Christian. He would not say, I'm a Christian, but I kind of want to be. I desire what I see. He talks about people, about atheists who have become Christians, and he does so wistfully. He's saying, I've tried to make my way over, and I haven't been able to yet, but I'm trying. And again, these young men that I see making these videos, they're very articulate, they're very well educated, they're very intelligent, as atheists often are, because they take the time to think through things. And if they don't find satisfactory answers to their questions, well, then they take a hard position against it. And what's happened, I believe, in our society is this cultural shift that atheists find unacceptable. And now I'm going to transition to telling you about the main interview that I watched. It was on a show that I really like, and so I'll give them a mention here. It's on a channel called Unheard, and that's spelled without an A, Unherd. And so I saw a fascinating discussion this afternoon between Richard Dawkins, who is probably the preeminent atheist on the planet, with another person who's probably was the preeminent female atheist on the planet, who's kind of a disciple of his. And on the show Unheard, she interacts with him as a former atheist. In other words, as someone who has spent her life really developing and promoting the various facets of atheism, only to realize that wasn't the answer. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just summarize for you her testimony because it's very powerful. She was raised in Africa under a Muslim influence and had horrible things inflicted on her because of being raised that way. She's a highly intelligent woman. She was able to escape that, and she became part of Western society and really is a scholar when it comes to fields of feminism or atheism. And she really is, for people in those areas, she's a household name. And recently, I assume this is within the last year, she experienced a great depression, a deep depression that she could not break out of. And it's a depression that she associates with her atheism. She looked at what was going on in our culture and she was revolted by it, especially since 2020 and then in 2023 with what happened on October 7th. And then she saw the very students who would be members of her podcasts chanting, death to Israel slogans and signing petitions saying that the women who were raped and the babies that were slaughtered were solely responsible for the crimes and not the Palestinians that were committing them. And having grown up under the heel of Muslim doctrine, she was especially horrified by this because she knows what it's like to live in a Muslim-run country. And she experienced a despair because she recognized that what had happened in America was a collapse of the Judeo-Christian values that had been the underpinning of our free society. You take that away, and the vacuum is going to be filled by something else. And to her horror, she realized it's been filled with radical Islam and its surrogate wokeism. And so she despaired, and she actually said, she became suicidal. And she sought help. She went to different counselors and she said, I don't know what to do. I'm the person people quote when it comes to understanding things like atheism. And she said, I don't know where to go, what to do. And ultimately, she had a counselor who summed it up for her very simply. She said, I think the problem is you are spiritually bankrupt. And she had never considered that possibility before, but the phrase really stuck with her. And she became determined to understand why it resonated within her. And it caused her to do something that she had never done before, and that is to really look into Christianity and to pray to the Christian God. And she found that praying to God actually helped lift her spirits. In other words, she conducted a little bit of a personal experiment. She did something that was completely foreign to her upbringing and to her intellectual life of achievements. She prayed to Jesus, and it helped. And so over time, she read the New Testament. She learned more about God. She began to pray to God. And now today, she counts herself not only as a cultural Christian, but as a believing Christian. And it was fascinating to watch the interplay between Richard Dawkins, the preeminent atheist of our day, and this former atheist, as she's describing her conversion experience online, to the audience that's being broadcast to millions of people. And he's rather horrified by it. And he's wanting to talk her out of it. And it's a fascinating exchange. And ultimately, what it comes down to is he agrees with her that our culture has been hollowed out and that it has been corrupted into something that is far worse. And indeed, Richard Dawkins has in this last year come out as what he calls a cultural Christian. In other words, he would say that I like a country much better if it's a democracy or if it's a Christian values-based nation. I'm far more comfortable in such a place, even though I don't believe any of the religion. I think the religion is completely false, but I have to agree that it produces a much better society than the alternative. And she said, well, how did we get here? How did we get to this place? And who's been in charge? And he said, well, secular humanism is the dominant worldview of our society, as it should be. And she said, well, if it's the dominant worldview, then why are we here? And he said, well, we just need to do a better job of getting our message across. What we need is more rational thought. And that will rescue people out of the chanting for the death of the Jews, is if we could just train people to think more rationally about things. And it was such an interesting contrast between these two expressions of the value of Christianity. One is saying it produces a better society, and the other one is saying, well, have you considered why? But what I'd like to do for the remainder of my time in talking to you about this is educate you and prepare you for an opportunity that you might have to speak to someone who is coming out of atheism. And again, this is not usually going to be accompanied by a dramatic, what they would call an ecstatic or a supernatural experience. Those of you who know my testimony know I came to know the Lord through a supernatural, biblical level miracle. And confronted with it, I could no longer disbelieve. But the vast majority of people don't have that eye-opening, jaw-dropping type of moment. It's rather a process. And so if somebody interacts with you, and perhaps they're a young man, as they're likely to be, why is it that young men in ever-increasing numbers are growing disillusioned with atheism? Well, it's because they've recognized that our society is increasingly hostile to them, and that it really doesn't welcome them with open arms of inclusion. It is a society that is weighted against them, not for them. And so they're feeling without a home worldview. And most of them were not raised in believing homes. And let's just talk about that a little bit. In 1962, there was a landmark Supreme Court decision that ruled that it was unconstitutional for there to be public prayer, mandated prayer in schools. And after that followed a series of liberal decisions that gradually reduced the scope of God in the public life. And even though the Constitution speaks of freedom of religion, eventually that came to be more interpreted as freedom from religion. Well, the generation that was raised following that decision grew up in the 60s, in the 70s, and they became a generation of rebels. There was the sexual revolution. There were the protests against the war against Vietnam. There was the hippie movement. There were all these different rebellions against classic Judeo-Christian values. And that generation then went on and moved through society as they aged. And that generation is now probably in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So they've long since left their mark on society and reshaped society to reflect their identity as a countercultural force. Perhaps the most important contribution is they raised children in accordance with their worldview. And so that group of children who was raised in the 80s and the 90s, they made their way through society, and right now they're at their peak power in society. And as with the generation before them, they have now raised children, and those children are now the third generation that has been raised with a moral vacuum in society. And it's a vacuum that has grown increasingly more pronounced to where in America today, if you are a Christian, you don't feel like you're in the majority. You feel like you have to be very careful about what you say because you're going to get canceled or you're going to get shunned or shamed by people who will have no hesitancy about doing it because they will feel that they are the arbiters of what's right and wrong in America. And so over the 60-year period, we've seen a very significant reshaping of spirituality in America to where the number of people who are truly born again in America is certainly in the minority. I don't know what the latest statistics are. I know the drop in church-going population is absolutely precipitous. It's dropped off a cliff. And probably the greatest cultural revolution has come since 2020, where we saw these seismic shifts in our culture between the pandemic and staying at home in an age of social media and all the reinforcement and echo chambers that that produced, to the George Floyd riots and the defund the police movement, and just absolutely crazy, idiotic ideologies that would have been rejected out of hand just a few years earlier. Amazingly, they caught hold amongst a significant percentage of America. And then we have and I'm sure there are other events you could point to, but then we have the October 7th attack. And you have the atrocity of American college students demonstrating on the side of the attackers, on the side of the terrorists. And what is happening is even people who are completely removed from God are recognizing our society is bankrupt. Our society does not offer moral clarity. It offers no moral guidance at all. It has become unhinged. And they are looking as atheists for something to hold on to in the turbulent waters of America today. And they're finding that their atheism is not up to the challenge. And instead, they're realizing that their atheism has made them cynical and skeptical and bitter and lonely, and ultimately without hope for the future. I remember a conversation I had some months ago with a friend of mine, and I don't have many friends who aren't believers, but this individual is one. And we talked candidly about his lifelong lack of belief in God. And as he now approaches the age of mortality and has had some serious health issues, I've said to him, how are you dealing with the future when you die? And he said, yeah, it's a problem. This is a very bright individual. And he says, well, I said, you realize your choices are nothingness or damnation. Those are the only two possible outcomes of your view. He said, yeah. He said, I've had to come to that conclusion. And it's really disturbing to him because it's one thing when it's an intellectual exercise and you're going to stand by your convictions. It's another, as my dad used to say, who served in World War II and almost died 3 times. He said, there are no atheists in foxholes. He said, I shared foxholes with people who were atheists. And let me tell you, when the bombs were dropping on our position, they prayed just as loud as the people who are Jews or Christians next to them, because it is in the nature of mankind to reach out for something that's larger than they are in times of crisis. And for people who don't have this, this is a very alarming time for them. We can pray, God, we need your help. We need you in our society. The atheist can't pray for anything. And the atheist can no longer blame Christians because secular humanists promised a world that, as John Lennon said, a world without religion. Imagine it. Imagine the utopia we'll create when we finally, wipe this disease off of our boots and just rid ourselves of the scourge of religion. What a glorious society we'll build. And people believe this. They believed that rational thought would just replace the foolishness or the antiquated values of Christianity. And now they've lived out what they hoped for, and it did not bring the results that they were promised. And so increasingly over these last 4 years, people who've held on to this worldview are abandoning it because on a societal and on a personal level, it simply has not worked. And so that allows them for the first time to start to question, to ask. And that's where you come in. Perhaps there's someone in your family that comes to mind when I mention this. Or maybe it's people you interact with at work. It could be someone who's in your life in a variety of different ways. But regardless of how it is, if you have the chance to interact with them, the first thing you want to do is be very gentle and non-judgmental. This is a shock to them. When this person, and her name was Ayan Ali, when she shared what she did publicly, one of the things she did was she apologized to everyone. And she said, I want to take responsibility because I was part of the problem. I was a spokesperson for atheism. And the changes that I see in our society that concern me so much, I'm a part of the reason they have come about. Because what I taught, what I stood for, led to the moral vacuum that has now been filled with wokeism and radical Islam. And so she said, I'm sorry. And I really admired her courage in that moment because you so rarely hear an individual own up to their human fallibility. And really, it's such foolish pride that prevents us from doing so, because the truth is that all of us have been wrong about many things over the course of our lives. And if you'll just admit it, people will respect you more, not less. But yet, don't ever assume that anyone who's coming out of atheism is going to be ready to do that. They don't want to be reminded of, well, you were wrong. No, they want to be offered something that they don't have in their life, and that is hope. And I think the most valuable thing you can share with them is your personal story of how a relationship with God has impacted your life, because they're looking for what you have and they do not. Don't lecture them about doctrine. You're not going to rationally convince them by argument. You have to show them that you have something they lack, that they want, that they're going to go out and get. Atheists have done is they've set up a completely artificial dichotomy. What they've done is they said, okay, I'm going to choose my religious position by this position of I have to have it proved to me. So if the claim that there is a God who created the universe is an extraordinary claim. Therefore, I demand extraordinary proof that it's so. And until I get that extraordinary proof, I don't believe in it. And the way I would respond to someone who honestly believes that is, well, let me ask you about everything else that's important in your life. When you select a mate or partner, are you going to do it by that same standard? Are you going to demand absolute proof of them that they are the perfect person for you before you're going to commit to them? Of course not. When you make a decision about having children, are you going to go through spreadsheets and debates and come up with this rational conclusion that is beyond a shadow of a doubt? Of course not. You're going to make a choice at some point. You're simply going to weigh the things. It may be part rational, it may be mostly emotional, but ultimately you're simply going to choose what seems right to you. When you decide what job to take, are you going to demand of your employer, prove to me that this is the best job for me to take? They'd laugh you right out of the office. Nobody makes decisions in life that way. So why are you requiring this of spirituality? It's simply not true of human experience. People make decisions based on what seems right to them, not by this secular rational analysis. And should that rational analysis be part of the story? Absolutely. Your head and your heart have to find a happy compromise. If you are emotionally in love with someone, but everything in your head is telling you, no, they're not the right person, well, that's going to be a difficult relationship. You've got to find a way to have both your head and your heart agree. So with atheists that you might come across, don't try to reason them into faith, because they've been down that road before, and that's how they came to reject theism. Instead, tell them of your life experience and how your life was changed for the better by finding a relationship with a God who cares about you and who gives you purpose. Because if I would say there's one big difference between atheists and theists or believers, is that an atheist, a true atheist, cannot find meaning in life. Nothing ultimately matters. There is no absolute right or wrong. There is no future. There's no life after death. There's nothing to hope in. There's nothing to lift you up in life. All it is, as Solomon says, it's all vanity. It's all chasing after the wind. Ultimately, it's all meaningless. And that's what atheism offers people. And they've settled for it because probably they haven't experienced the real thing. If you have the real thing, then show them the fruits of it. Don't tell them the doctrines. Show them the fruit of authentic faith, and see if they don't come back to you and say, tell me more. Reach out to them in a way that they can respond positively on the next leg of their spiritual journey.
What are the fruits that you're talking about to show the atheists?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you two answers. I'm going to give you a scriptural answer and I'm going to give you a practical answer. The fruits of the Spirit are found in Galatians 5:22, and they are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. And so I know that's a lot to take in one bite, but go to Galatians 5:22 and you can ponder what that means. But now let me talk about it on a practical level. The fruit is the outworking of having a right relationship with God. If you have a right relationship with God, it will change you from the inside out. Jesus said, they will know you by your fruit. And so if you are walking in right relationship with God, people will sense that in you. They will desire the something in you that they know perfectly well that they lack. That's what I mean by the fruit. In dealing with an atheist, I think one of the hindrances to them moving forward in faith is the idea that there is this bright line between faith and science or faith and rationality, like they're two separate things. And the reality is they're not at all. There is no contradiction between faith and science or faith and rationality. I think that the way to encourage them to move forward on their spiritual journey is to say, when you're an atheist, aren't you choosing what it is you're going to believe in, what world system? You can choose to believe that everything came from nothing. You could choose to believe that everything came from a creator. Either way, you're choosing to believe in something. You can't prove any more than I can prove how the universe started. Both of us are choosing something to believe. You're choosing something to believe, or at least you have in the past, that leaves you unfulfilled. I'm believing in something that has the exact opposite impact on me. Think about that.